this is the session on Eclectic India. And let me begin by introducing the panelists so that you know who's who. On the extreme right is G. Sampath, whose book will never feature on the self-help shelf of a bookstore. It's called How to Make Enemies and Offend People. On my right is Vanessa, who was crazy enough to drive a nano around 10,000 kilometers in the country. And on my left is Rishi Piparaiya. I swear I practiced it. And his book, I'll Be Damned, unlike his second name, is a really easy and cool read about being a frequent air traveler around the world. We did, like responsible panelists, exchange 3 emails about what we would talk about. And we decided that we would talk about Eclectic India in terms of the varied subjects it offers non-fiction writers to write about, and as well as how eclectic an audience or a readership we have. When I wrote my book, Would You Like Some Bread with That Book? The book started after an article I wrote in the paper about the difficulty of finding an appropriate book to read while going on a trek to the Everest base camp. So when my publisher called me and asked me if I'd want to write a few more of those and compile them into a book, I said yes, and the first 7 or 8 were fairly easy to write. They were my own my personal history with the book, or my tendency to read through continents and so on and so forth. But after the 8th or 9th, I began to think about who will read this book and what would they want from it. And I made these really strict framework of what the next few essays should be about. So I decided that I will not write about really heavy and intense books. I certainly will not write about Proust. I'll certainly not write about Shakespeare, because we are barely recovering from the trauma of studying him in our 10th standard for the board exams. And I wanted to make sure that I referenced books that I thought people would have heard about or read, and then introduce other books that I thought were obscure, and if someone read this book, then they may be interested in that. 2 surprising things happened after the publication of the book. One is that despite my very rigid framework, both my publisher and my mother came back with the feedback that for a book about books, there is way too much sex in the book. And the second was readers started writing into me with their reading list, and it was really surprising how eclectic their choice of books were. And while there is a large number of people who we say, oh, read the really badly written books, there is an equally large number who read obscure books, and they write into me saying, have you read this one about North Korea? Or there is this North Korean crime thriller written by a former CIA agent. Have you heard about that? And it's amazing. So my takeaway from this is that there is an eclectic readership out there. In fact, as eclectic as the number of subjects that India throws up. Let me just throw this open to the panel. And Sampath, your essays are a collection of everyday instances which are humorous. And they talk about a lot of aspects that one tends to be rather serious about in the public discourse. So do you think, and especially in India, where there is a group which is ready to take offense at everything, do you think writing humor is limiting, in the sense that do you censor yourself based on the fact that the readership out there is eclectic and some of whom might be offended by some things that you write?
As far as censoring myself is concerned, I mean, it always happens post facto. And after you've written it, censorship happens in the public domain, I think. You know, like speaking of eclectic responses, like one of the most eclectic feedback I've received to any of my pieces, humor pieces, is by this person who began by saying, I would like to, he began by sort of questioning my antecedents, my parentage, my mother's character, and finally ended by saying that, bastard, I'm going to come and kill you. And then he was a Sachin Tendulkar fan, and I had written a piece making fun of Sachin, So Sachin is a public figure, for example, and a lot of nice things are said about him by a lot of people. So if you were to poke fun at somebody who is a cult figure, then naturally many people would feel that you're asking for it, and you should be able to take it. So do you censor yourself, and how far do you go in terms of censoring yourself? Because censoring interferes with the creative process. And humor, I think, is very, very critical in the public sphere for two reasons. One, it's very closely tied in with equality. You know, I mean, usually the biggest targets for satire and humor are those who are too big for their boots. You know, those larger than life figures. You know, so you have celebrities who are easy targets. And secondly, I think it's also to do with extending the amount of risk which can be taken. You know, humor which doesn't take risk tends to be rather tame, and we have, at least in this country, a lot of holy cows, and you know, I think the number should come down. And so if we begin with censorship and start thinking, you know, what would people say? And like one of the frequent feedbacks I get is, why do you have to write about this? You know, like I did a piece on Ajay Devgan's nipples, okay? That is a legitimate question. Why should you write on Ajay Devgan's nipples? Because why would you want to do it? I mean, you must be crazy, right? But it is, I think even that is a legitimate subject, you know, because if you have a huge cutout of somebody which is there in your face every time you step out of your house, and if you look at him and if you've seen him, he's not, I mean, this might sound racist, but he's not, I mean, he wouldn't be somebody who would be first choice for brand ambassador of Fair and Lovely, you know. It sort of gets into you and you start writing about it, and then you get, I mean, I was flooded with abuses from Ajay Devgan fans. I did not realize he had such a tremendous amount of fan following, which is my own ignorance. So I ended up offending more people, I think, than the number of people who would have found it funny. But yeah, but then you do these things, and then it tends to sort of extend the public sphere. Like another piece which I consciously decided not to include in this book was a piece on Modi, you know. It was titled Diary of a Narendra Modi Devotee. And it's a diary entry, you know, one day in the life of, you know, how he begins, what he thinks, you know, when will Narendra Modi become Prime Minister. It goes on, it's a satirical piece. And I did not include it advisedly because I didn't want that to hijack the whole book, you know. So in that sense, you could call that is kind of censorship. Yeah. It should have been there, but it wasn't there. So, but it's still there in the public domain for those of you who are Modi fans or otherwise to read it, you know, and you can see whether it's funny or not. Yeah.
No, I've read the Ajay Devgan piece, and I think you were sufficiently traumatized by his nipples, and it shows through. But to sort of, you know, round up this argument, can Indians take a joke?
I think they can take a joke as long as it's on somebody else, and if it's on themselves, I think they're not really comfortable laughing at themselves, I think. Because if you compare the kind of comedy and humor which sort of is prominent in the Indian public sphere and compare it with what goes on in the US, you know, David Letterman, Jay Leno, you know, Sarah Silverman. I mean, I wrote a funny piece on rape, you know, but many editors, I mean, many people, I mean, even editors otherwise, they wouldn't want to carry a funny piece on rape. They would say, you can't joke about rape. But I would say that, you know, you can't lay down such rules a priori, you know, beforehand. You just have to take it and see if you find it funny, you don't find it funny. This wasn't published, but this is there in the book. I mean, I have a very long piece. It's the longest piece in the book, which, I mean, it's titled The Delhi Police Guide to the Indian Woman Who Wants to Know How Not to Get Raped. So it sort of gave, I mean, it got a lot of response, mostly from women who liked it. But many people would say that you can't joke about rape, and so there are two views about it, you know.
Rishi, although your book is about an aspect of life, air travel, that all of us indulge in, the language, and therefore I would think the position of the book is to the young and the irreverent. Did you sort of splice your readership and decide that this the audience that I want to reach to, and thereby ignore the eclecticism, as it were, of the Indian readership?
No, to be honest, I had actually no thoughts or ideas when I started the book. It didn't even start as a book. It just started as just as an essay. Right, I just put on the computer and started writing, and I thought it would be a 10-20 page essay. But as I kept writing, it actually turned into a 200-page book. I wrote it, I mean, I've been a corporate executive pretty much my entire career, so I just wrote it from a corporate executive sense, but I was completely surprised that actually once the book was out, it's just like you said, it's the young first-time traveler. I mean, they're really enjoying the book. So, so that actually the audience it's reaching is quite different from the audience I had actually thought about, or, you know, from the perspective that I had written about. So yeah, you never know what happens. You just put the work out and you never know who's really going to pick it up.
Tell us a little bit more about the book. I mean, why did you include the stuff that you did, and why did you keep out anything?
No, the book, I mean, it's again, like I spend half my life in the air. You know, I live in Mumbai, I work in Gurgaon, and I refuse to move here. So I take the flight back and forth. And it's just my observations. People say it's a humor book actually, but I think I'm just reporting the facts. So it covers the entire air travel journey from the time you enter the airport and pick up a baggage trolley, and it covers every aspect: how you should board, how you can get upgraded, should you sit in the window or the aisle, what you should eat, how you should use the loos. So it covers every aspect of air travel, and it's just I think just a funny look at it. In terms of censorship, no, but yeah, I agree completely with Sampath that it is hard to write humor. But anyways, when I was writing, I just wrote freely. But once it's going to become reality and once it's going out there in the public space, you kind of take a second look that would it offend anyone. In my case, I was concerned about offending the airline industry, so I've sent a copy of the book. And the upgrades, and you worry, will the stewards and stewardesses, will they spit in your food, will they, treat you badly, so you think about all that. But I sent a copy to the management team in every airline, so I think I'm covered, and they seem to like it. So, but yeah, you kind of do a little bit of self-censorship, a little bit, but I don't think you should really go all the way in censoring.
At most sort of forums, I think Rishi would be the crazy one because he lives in Bombay and works in Gurgaon. Except in this, because Vanessa drove around the country on a Tata Nano. Tell us about how did you think of this adventure, and what about India lend itself to this project?
I came up with the idea of the Nano specifically just by reading about it in the press. There was a lot of attention on it around 2009, around the time of its release. The dangerous aspect of it attracted me. I think that's what it was. If you're, as somebody who writes, I think you try to put yourself into uncomfortable, questionable situations in order to generate good material for yourself. And I think that the Nano, for me, sort of served as this thing that could be tested. This very, very cheap car that has been lauded for its, for the engineering that's gone into it. But the question was, has it really been tested? Could it really make it? From where I come from in Europe, India has this reputation. You see it in all the movies and the media, the traffic, the chaos. It's a very difficult country to drive in. I had no experience of doing this, so I thought, okay, if I put it together, I get the very cheap car, the not very experienced driver, and I put myself on a very dangerous road. What's going to happen? I don't know, but it could be funny. So that was pretty much the basis of how it came up.
Tell us a little bit more about what happened to you and the eclectic India that you saw in your travel.
Well, I mean, my range of experience was just huge. I drove 10,000 kilometers around the country, a little bit more, as it turned out. The mission was to start and end in Mumbai and to make a circle pretty much all the way around the country, covering cities, going through villages, into the mountains, into the deserts, to try and really cover the spectrum of geography, of people, of everything that I could possibly try and experience. The first couple of weeks were pretty much focused on just getting the hang of it, of being behind the wheel and not emerging in a sweat, shaking like every time I came to my destination, not getting cross with my fellow drivers, just escaping unscathed. And after that, once I kind of got into the rhythm of it and I began to understand how things work, it was a question of just seeing so many incredible things. And I think when you see it from the point of view of the road, you have a very particular experience because you're there. I kind of saw the car was kind of my avatar in that when I was in the car, I mean, at least from a distance, nobody can perceive that I'm female and nobody can perceive that I'm foreign. So I'm one of the lads. I'm in there in the scrum and I can really feel you have an experience of travel. You have an experience understanding the situation you're in a very particular way, in a very raw way. And I really appreciated that.
Rishi, I wanted to ask you about the format of the book. I saw that you also have a lot of funky photographs and really cool captions. I was reading Mindy Kaling's book recently, and she too has that same. How did that come about? And yours aren't necessarily photographs that are related to what you. I mean, they're quite out there.
I'm glad you like them. I love the photographs as well. Actually, I like them better than the book. A lot of people think it's a bit out of place, but one, I mean, I wanted a book which actually someone could just open. You open to any page and you can start reading it. It's a very fun, light read, and I think the photographs just add a touch of humor and a touch of. It's different from most of the other books out there. And well, the other secret is it's not a very thick book. So my publisher said we need to add some more. We need to add some more volume. So 60 photographs really helped add a lot of pages to it. But it's something different, and it makes the book lighter, I think. So.
Sampath, how do you decide on what you want to write about? I mean, you write about everything about your wife's collection of an inordinate number of saris to Ajay Devgan's nipples. How do you decide what you're going to write about?
I think the decisions sort of make themselves, you know. Like I find that I'm lucky in terms of finding myself in situations that sort of challenge stereotypes. For example, the section on the wife, for example, has received the maximum amount of positive feedback.
Is she still your wife? I wanted to ask you.
She is not here in the audience today, so I can say whatever I want without fear of being contradicted or interrupted. So I will say, like for example, like the usual stereotype is that the husband is the guy, the breadwinner, and the wife is the one who takes care of the house. Like here, I'm the sort of the homemaker, as it were, and she's the jet setter kind of. She's not even here today, after having promised to be here and all that. So, and also. Like she's very short-tempered, like if you've seen, and I'm a follower of the Dalai Lama. I'm very peace-loving, and I believe in non-violence. So these kind of contrasts sort of generate a lot of tension, which may not be very pleasant when the tension is going on, but subsequently when you look back and when you ask the other person to introspect, then a lot of things come out, and half the time you're like, she feels that. Am I talking to her or am I taking notes for my next, So these kinds of things happen, but yeah, that is one source of material. The other is, of course, I mean, if you read the newspapers, you don't really have to try very hard to be funny, You just need to transcribe what's happening, When there are like few emails which have been discussed, you just read the emails. They are like fantastic humor, It could have been written as a parody. It would still be, valid as a parody. So in one sense, it's very easy to sort of write funny stuff if you're talking about current affairs and what's happening. At another level, the challenge is not to sort of piss off too many people too fast in too short a time, Then, of course, you will be left without an audience, It's possible. Censorship can come back and bite you. So I guess you sort of need to strike a balance.
Tell us a little bit more about what readers have written to you about your wife's stories.
When some of her colleagues have sort of said to me, don't you realize that she works in this, and people would sort of wonder, and some of the pieces are sort of could be construed as not to be shared in the public domain, but see, we have an agreement in the sense any kind of decision which has a bearing on real life, on things to do day-to-day basis, running the house, the real world, she takes the final call. And anything which goes into the book, I take the final call. So that's worked fine so far. So she can do whatever she wants, says, and I have to live with it. But whatever I put into my book, she has to. I mean, so far it's worked fine. But yes, sometimes things could sort of, people might get out. I mean, can go away with the impression that she's only this kind of a person and so on. But I'm not saying that's not true. But can live with that, I suppose. As long as one is able to get one's point across and one is writing history, I guess it's fine.
Vanessa, tell us a little bit about the crazy adventures that you had. I distinctly remember one where a guy in Goa wanted to buy your car off you, and other such, and the mechanic who repaired it, who took the car away, and you weren't sure whether he was going to come back with it, but he wouldn't even charge you for it. So tell us a little bit more about it.
Actually, pretty much everywhere I went, people wanted to buy the car off me. It was it was back in the day when
Which is ironic because now no one wants to buy
it. I know. These were the glory days. It was before it was on general sale. I think it was still on the pre-order stage, and so people were very intrigued by it. Sometimes a couple of times once I was stopped at a traffic light, and a lad just came and he just opened the door of the passenger seat and just had a look in like that, just looked around. All good, yeah, closed the door and walked off. I was like, all right, nice to meet you. I mean, all sorts of adventures with the roads themselves. I encountered sort of traffic rules. I think a lot of the times when I was on the newly built expressways, and I sort of assumed that a two-lane expressway would be following the normal rules that I was used to anyway on a normal expressway, but all of a sudden there'd be a sort of a truck coming at me the other way in the fast lane, unexpected. There's sort of big holes in the road that hadn't quite been filled in yet. And in fact, there was a road that just stopped at one point, just stopped like on a cartoon. and continued. It was actually a bridge that hadn't been built yet, but I'd missed the diversion sign somewhere earlier on. I don't think it had been written in English. I was attacked by an elephant as well, who put a lot of elephant slime inside the car. I wouldn't recommend that. Quite hard to clean.
Hi, Vanessa. You almost answered my question. I was going to ask you whether the car did in fact break down and just how it performed. I mean, it was interesting too, because I think in the paper today or yesterday, Chairman of Tata said that he wished it hadn't been branded as the cheapest car in the world. That was definitely the wrong way of trying to sell it. You know, yeah. It was the wrong unique selling point.
Yeah, I think that really got them off on the wrong foot. I think once you brand anything as the cheapest anything, people immediately assume that something's going to be wrong with it, as I did too, which was why I decided to try it out and to see just how far you could push it. The truth is that when I drove it, it was a new car. I did 12,000 kilometers pretty much in it, and I had no problems at all. Like it went very well. It doesn't go very fast, you know, it's a slow car. I lost a couple of tires on the way, but I would say that was probably my fault. But it did perform very well. And yeah, now I think they're trying to actually really sort of turn around their marketing and try and find a different angle. I mean, I'm pretty sure that counts for the majority of the cases why people decided not to get the car and to go for maybe a different brand, because I tell the story in the book, but you know, at one point I had a conversation with somebody who was very interested in the Nano, but he himself had a Maruti Swift. And I said to him, well, would you ever be interested in buying the Nano? And he said, who wants to be seen in a poor man's car? And I think that was pretty much the attitude that was across the board towards the Nano.
And also when the Nano was launched, it was expressly stated that it wasn't meant for the highways. So did that worry you at all?
No.
That worried the Tata Group, I understand from your book. I mean, you tried to get them to endorse your project, but they wouldn't.
Yes. They were probably worried. They monitored me very carefully along the way. Yeah, I thought, I mean, it's not really built for, the wheels are very small, it hangs very low, the car, so I kind of thought any sort of off-roading that might be necessary, it probably wouldn't deal too well with. But at the same time, they were trying to market the car in more rural areas anyway, whereas to me, it completely seems a no-brainer that it would be more of a city car. I think the purpose of it wasn't thought out completely when it came out.
Congratulations on your book. I greatly look forward to reading it. Having worked with you for a while, I've always appreciated your sense of humor. So it's no surprise that you've actually come out with a book. So well done. Wanted to know, is there anything else in the pipeline? Are you going to continue writing, or this was just a one-off thing?
No, I hope to. I think as Sampath said, there's material all around us. This was actually my third attempt. I had written a book on corporate life. I had written a book on college life. Unfortunately, I lost both those books because I didn't save the document on my computer. There's material all around us. I have no idea what the next topic would be, but I'm sure I'll find something or the other. But thank you. Thanks.
This question is for Sampath here. Without your specs, you know the reason why you lost your specs today. Recently, one of your articles was pulled down by the newspaper that you write for, and then it was brought back on. So how easy or difficult it is to convince your editor that you want to put this, and the publication may not be completely convinced by it. And then I've read a lot of your articles, you know, at times your articles are obviously funny, but the comment section is far funnier, because you know the way they get back at you, especially when you're talking about Modi, and you know they start by swearing, and you know, so how does the publication react to, you know, the newspaper that you work for is not so controversial paper at the same time? So how do you handle it?
It's very simple to handle it, because I think you worked in a paper too before, right? And the editor's decision is final. You know, he's like the third umpire. So whatever the editor says goes. That's the final decision. That isn't usually much of a discussion, you know. And this, I mean, initially one thinks that if a particular piece is not taken for whatever reasons, you wonder, you know, you sort of spend a lot of mental energy worrying about it. But then later on, I realized that it's more common than one thinks, you know. And especially if you are writing satire or humor. When someone like Dave Barry, for example, like he's got a strike rate of some 60% or 70%. So I mean, people like Dave Barry and Sarah Silverman, their pieces are rejected by the papers they write for, not because it's a good piece or a bad piece, but because each publication has its own kind of guidelines on what lines can be crossed, what cannot be crossed, and that's not always very evident to a writer. So sometimes you learn to live with it, and other times you just sort of forget about it after a point. But yes, I mean, coming back to a point which Vanessa made about many disasters and putting yourself in uncomfortable situations being a very good way to sort of generate new material. And I'm like, my mind is only 50% here, because I'm really worried about my spectacles, which somebody broke today. After like 5 minutes before I was to come up on stage, and I can't see anybody, and I'm sitting here at just all blurred faces, and I'm thinking about it, and I don't find it funny at all. But when it broke, a lot of people laughed, So that's something which I was thinking about, and in that sense, even in the public sphere, if certain bad things happen, they are automatically material for people who are writing. But at the same time, they are also something which can be offensive to people who are at the receiving end, From that point of view, yes, the comments I've got are really, really, really abusive. But you learn not to react. Going by the number of people who've said I am on the payroll of the Congress, I should have been a crorepati by now. But I'm still waiting for my first, rupee or whatever to come from the UPA coffers. So yeah, so you get a lot of abuses, but it's part of the game. I think you can't really complain.
The thing is that of all the people that you've made fun of, let me give you an option: Narendra Modi, Arnab Goswami, and Ajay Devgan. Or any other. Who would you like to meet and discuss your column or your essay with them?
I would like to meet all of them, but I don't think any of them would be interested in meeting me.
Just to sort of ask you about the comments section, do you follow comments obsessively? Do you sort of refresh and read every new comment?
No, not really. I mean, initially I do, but if the comments, if the number of comments is like too many, if it crosses 100, then I sort of lose track, because there's so many different things you have to do. I mean, I have to start thinking about the next piece I'm doing. So I don't really, if I don't get the time, I don't. But if there is a lot of idle time, yeah, I do go and check, because it's important for a writer to keep track of your readers' feedback and what they think, and to be in touch. So from that point of view, it's necessary, but you need to sort of prioritize. Otherwise, you get drawn into somebody keeps. I mean, like the latest Sting, Cobra post Sting says that a lot of comments and trending subjects are driven by IT companies which are paid for. If I have written a piece on Modi which is critical of him or poking fun at him, and if, as per this Cobra post, whatever operation, they say that the BJP and the Modi have got a lot of companies on their payroll, to go and, like those the beehives or swarms of fishes go and, attack somebody who says anything, then it will be foolish on my part to sort of to look at each of those comments and feel bad or good about it. So I guess you need to be a little detached.
But you do feel smug about the fact that you're keeping so many people employed.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, I see your point. Yeah, that's not a bad thing to think of.
I think this is a very good initiative taken by a collaborative effort by Indian Habitat Center and Eureka Forbes and so on and so forth. It makes me feel like I should write a book, seeing all the young people here. I have a few questions to each one of you. So I'll start with Rishi. Did you ever fear that you will be boarding a plane that will never land? Because you see all these things happening around you. I feel scared sometimes.
No, all the time. I mean, I'm a really nervous flyer. And that's another way the book just came about, because I would go tell all these flying stories to my friends, and I was very serious about it, and they would laugh. And I've got anecdotes in the book. For example, I take a water bottle, right, and I put the water bottle on the tray table, and I spend time watching the water level. Right? Is it churning? Is it going up? Is it going down? Because that tells me what the flight is doing. People found it humorous. I find it's great data. I was sitting next to the chairman of Hindustan Unilever, and I had this whole, pitch in my mind. I'm going to have a chat with him, and I'm going to, pitch for a job. And I had this whole conversation in my mind. And the flight took off, and there was some turbulence. And I just reached out and I held his hand. Right? So I was the chairman of Unilever out there. I'm holding his hand and I'm wailing. And so much so for moving into foods. Right? I'm still stuck in financial services. So but all these, I'm a very nervous flyer, and every time I fly, there's a new story. And that's why the book was never ending, because every time I would fly, I'd come back to my publisher and say, I want to add one more page. And at some point they said, look, we have to now stop. So hopefully there'll be a second edition.
Would you ever make any joke on Dr. Manmohan Singh, and do you think any humor would work on him? No offense on him, but any joke do you think is going to work on him, considering the situation we are all living in?
I think there are there are far more number of jokes on Manmohan Singh than probably any other Indian Prime Minister, than any other Prime Minister. I think I haven't really thought it necessary to sort of write anything funny about him, because there are a lot of jokes on him already. You know, people
Nothing
just
works,
mention him,
right?
and
Nothing
there are people who have written like reams of articles without naming him. They've just said Mauni Baba, and people get it. You know, so I don't. I think he's of course a very ripe subject for humor.
Do you fear that if you write something about any politician and you'll be thrown behind the bars, or any article you're going to write on anybody who's in power, do you fear that sometimes, which makes you not write about the person?
There are legal frameworks, you know, which tell you what is defamation and what is slander, and you know how far you can go, and also. So as long as you're on the right side of that, I think anybody should be game for satire or humor. And that is one. And the other thing is, of course, each publications are very careful by themselves. So that is another layer of filtration which happens when you're writing something. So these two things, I think, are more than enough. And over and above that, if a writer is going to be doing self-censorship, I think you should do something else, you know, maybe do get into real estate or something like that, you know.
Did you ever have to break any traffic rule while driving? And, you know, did you think twice, and did you get hit by anybody?
I had to figure out what the traffic rules were first. I did get into a little scrape in a scrum when you have the railway crossings and the bars come down and all the cars come and you have to wait. And I likened it to sort of two armies just waiting to meet each other in battle, because the entire road was full on both sides of vehicles of every order. And when the gates went up and everybody just moves forward, and there's some kind of strange filtering effect where you have to just shimmy through. And it was the first time I'd done it, and I was very bad at it, and I hit a rickshaw. But he drove off before I had the chance to come out and apologize, mysteriously. But that, luckily, thankfully, my fate was in good hands, and that was the worst thing that happened.
What would you be thinking again if you have to ever travel the distance climbing the Everest? Would you?
No, I was foolish enough to do it the first time.
Okay.
I've never attempted anything remotely stupid ever after. No.
Did you come with certain perception to India, and did those perception get reinforced or changed after you completed those 10,000 kilometers? I mean, I was reading this article in Telegraph about this gentleman who traveled with his wife in Delhi metro, and I think he was very surprised and impressed by the fact that there were no cows on the metro station, and I found that frankly really ridiculous perception to come to India with. And did it change? Did it get reinforced? What?
Well, I'd been here before. I travelled here about 10 years previously. From the point of view of somebody who's a student who's backpacking around India, as I was in the 90s, I think I saw a very particular slice of the country. And I think that was the main thing that occurred to me, that there's so many different points of view through which you can view things and through which you can view, especially India. You know, so that there's so many people who come to visit the country and who see it in a completely different way, depending on who they are and how they're traveling. And so I'd seen one particular vision when I was younger, and that was the one that had stayed with me, because that was the only impression that I had. And it was one where, you know, I'd been at the mercy of lots of badly functioning, unfortunately, public transport, and, you know, very sort of crowded situations where, especially because a lot of that time I was also on my own, sometimes felt like, you know, uncomfortable in certain situations, being alone. And so taking a car and being in a car allowed me to see a completely different vision of how things work, I think. And it did completely revise how I thought about things. I was impressed, actually, with a lot of the road infrastructure that does exist now, and the ease with which you can make certain journeys in the country. I think generally just the courtesy that was shown me as a single woman driving around. I wasn't quite sure what sort of attitudes I would meet from people, but generally pretty much 99% of everybody I encountered was helpful and encouraging and supportive, and you know, were really like, come on, yeah, you go, you know. When they saw a car with Maharashtrian number plates up in Orissa, you know, oh my God. Yeah, so I would say that was pretty much my impression.
My question is to Sampath. Political satire in India has a long tradition, especially in the vernacular languages, that is the Hindi, Marathi and all. Do you think what is important for a political satirist? The tradition of satire, because what I am seeing in the English media satire, the thing is that what is presented as a satire is just maybe, the issues, the core ideological issues which are discussed in the certain languages, satire in the languages. For example, there is just reading book, just this thought came to me because I was reading a book by Harshankar Persai, who was the most celebrated satirist of Hindi literature. He used to political satire which he used to make, or the satire which he used to do in everybody, not only on politicians but even on writers, and writers of the stature of Mahashweta Devi. The satire were always dipped and nipped in the ideological framework of Mr. Harshankar Persai. So apart from being it a satire, it also gave a political dimension or ideological framework for the reader to understand the issues, not the persons but the policies the person is espousing. So in your personal opinion, do you think that is required to do, or do you think that there is a disconnect that the satire in India is facing, the satirists are in India is facing?
See, I'm not very well read in satire in languages other than English in India. So I'm not really, I won't be able to answer about the questions you asked in other languages. But coming to the ideological aspect, I believe there is no writing which happens outside of ideology. Anything you write, even so-called those who proclaim themselves to be non-ideological, they are writing within an ideology, because the ideology they might be writing from is considered as common sense. It doesn't seem like ideology. So capitalism is not an ideology, but communism is an ideology. So feminism is an ideology, but equality is not an ideology. So there is always ideology, whether you're writing satire or whether you're writing something which is in praise of whoever. So yes, your satire will always necessarily have a political angle to it, a political dimension to it, and it comes down to whether you are challenging power or on the side of power. I think satire necessarily has to challenge power, otherwise it's going to be very difficult to justify its existence.
So you mentioned that 99% of the people were very supportive and encouraging, and that's nice to know, but what about the 1%, if you could elucidate a little of that as to how bad was that 1% and what that was all about? That's my question to you. And to Mr. Sampath, my question is that while political philosophies always underlie any piece of writing, obviously, but labels of political parties or personalities necessarily do not. I mean, you can target a certain personality without actually, for example, you mentioned that you're not UPA sponsored if you criticize Narendra Modi, or if someone criticizes Manmohan Singh, he's not necessarily BJP sponsored. So why is it that in our country we are facing such a discourse of extremes wherein we cannot understand and rationalize that there can be a middle ground and someone need not be sponsored by someone else to actually make a certain point? And religious right-wing people, not only Hindu writers, to be fair, even Muslim writers and others, who want to stifle this space. So what can we do as a civil society to address this problem?
I want to say that, well, there were different types of discouragement or objection that I met, from people who knew me, firstly for my personal safety, from people in perhaps more sort of far-flung rural areas, just a sort of strange lack of recognition, lack of being able to communicate, and therefore some kind of closeness, I think, came about as that. But talking about Naresh, I met Naresh just before I embarked on the journey, and we had a chat about the implications of doing something like this. And on a more serious note, there is this obviously this extremely valid point of view that the last thing we really need right now is for companies to be putting hundreds of thousands more cars out into the system, when really there's a great need to improve the public transport infrastructure. And there's other things that there's a lot more people, there's so much more weight on public transport than there is on the private car sector. And therefore, sort of encouraging it, indulging in it, whatever, it's taking a certain political standpoint. And it's one that I definitely have a lot of sympathy with, especially having been around the country in a car and having seen the kinds of problems that traffic faces and that public transport itself faces too. I think there's a lot there that needs to be sorted out.
Regarding your question about the middle ground. So the 2 points I think I would like to make. See, one is I think what you're rightly characterized is a consequence of a larger phenomena in the public sphere which is happening. Basically what is happening is, if you look at the traditional framework of the left, center and right, I think what used to be left has sort of moved to the right. There's a overall shift of political positions. The public discourse is more and more moving towards the right, and what used to be the center earlier is more to the right now. So what used to be left is more to the right. So that sort of will automatically result in a shrinking of the middle ground which you're talking about. And secondly, when you say something critical of, say, a particular party and you're labeled as being on the payroll of the other party, what happens is it frees you from having to engage with the argument. So the moment you start labeling the person, whoever is making an argument, it means, suppose you say something and the person says you're a communist. That means you don't have to engage with anything the person says because he's a communist or because he's a Hindutva guy or whatever. So rather than respond to any kind of an argument through labels, I think if you engage with the arguments, that is important to sort of maintain the sphere of engagement so that it remains wide. Otherwise, there will be no possibility. You'll only have people outraging over something or the other all the time. Not much discussion is going to happen.
Thank you, Ms. Vanessa, Ms. Veena, Mr. Sampath and Mr. Rishi for this interesting session.